My name is Robert Jacob, and I've been a living historian for over 50 years now. Did Rev War all through the bicentennial, and most recently I got into pirate living history. You can see by the several different outfits that I have there. I also appeared, I'm going to have to hold the clicker up here to get a line of sight. I appeared on the History Channel's episode Beyond Oak Island as a pirate expert. They flew me out to California. That was a lot of fun. And I have written 2 books. A Pirate's Life in the Golden Age of Piracy, which is a comprehensive history of all of the pirates from 1625 to 1722, and Pirates of the Florida Coast. Those books are here for sale if anybody would like to take a look at them after the presentation and get a copy. Most of the material you're hearing today is in the Florida book. So if you don't have to take notes, you can get a copy. All right, so Florida obviously has a long association with pirates, and that's obvious because of this. Yeah, so everybody recognizes that. But, you know, how much of that is truth and how much of that is legend and myth? And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today with Florida's most famous legendary pirate, José Gaspar. Now, I thought everybody knew who José Gaspar was, especially in the Tampa area. I'm surprised outside of the state, nobody heard of him. Even like at the Panhandle, I was doing a pirate festival up there and I was talking about José Gaspar. I said, who? So let's get the word out about José Gaspar. So who was this person? Well, he was born in 1756 in Seville, Spain, to rather influential parents. But he was a problem child that liked the ladies and always pursued them. Even as a teenager, was going after the ladies, and he wound up kidnapping one and held her like prisoner for 3 days. At least that was her story. And the judge said, we're going to give you a choice. Join the Army or join the Navy. So he chose the Navy, and because of his influential parents, they got him a seat in the Naval Academy of Spain. Well, when he graduated, he became, obviously, an officer. Spain was going through a lot of problems with the Barbary pirates on the north coast of Africa. They were attacking Spanish ships continually. And José Gaspar was sent in to see what he could do about stopping this. And so in the 1780s, there he goes, he was very, very successful at sinking a whole bunch of these Barbary pirates. And there's one more, here it goes. So, as a reward, he got promoted to admiral. Then they decided to assign him in 1782 to the court of the king, King Carlos III, as their naval attaché. Now, in court, he immediately started a love affair with a woman named Maria Luisa, pictured there. Now, that wasn't a very wise thing to do, because Maria Luisa was the wife of the king's son and future queen of Spain. But they kept the relationship pretty quiet. But eventually, he got tired and broke off the relationship with her. Then there was another person, the Prime Minister, Manuel Godoy. The two of them just did not get along. The bad chemistry, bad decisions, who knows? But those two were great adversaries on the court. Well, eventually he married a woman named Donna Rosalita and had 2 children. But you know, Maria Luisa was always kind of mad at him for breaking off their relationship. She liked their relationship. And Manuel Godoy didn't like him at all either. So she got Manuel Godoy to frame him for stealing the crown jewels. He was supposed to be transporting the crown jewels on the ship, the Flora Blanca, and they paid his crew to steal the jewels. But even worse, Manuel Godoy, here we go, let's see. Manuel Godoy went to his house, burned it to the ground, and killed his wife and children. So, he got a new crew, vowed vengeance against the Spanish, and left Spain in the Flora Blanca to make sailed for the Gulf of Mexico. Now when he arrived, he found this nice little island called Boca Grande. He thought, this is really nice. I'm going to make my base here at Boca Grande. And he renamed the island Gasparilla Island in honor of himself. His crew settled on the small island right behind him, which was actually a Calusa burial mound. So they could be up on top of the burial mound and get a good view of the ships that might be coming up. Now, just a little bit of historical background. Let's jump back a while for the Gulf settlements. The first Gulf settlement was St. Mark's in 1679, Pensacola, Biloxi, Mobile, and finally New Orleans. The ones in blue were French. The ones in red were Spanish, because France had Louisiana. And shipping started to go to all of those settlements. There was very little shipping in the Gulf of Mexico prior to that. But now you had ships coming in bringing supplies and taking out agricultural goods and whatever that they were producing in the settlements. In 1783, Louisiana became Spanish Louisiana when they sold it to France. So now all of those cities are Spanish. And this was the environment that José Gaspar came into. The Gulf of Mexico was filled with Spanish ships. And remember, he vowed against the Spanish, so this was a perfect environment for Jose. He could capture ships coming out of any of the major cities. Yeah, let's see, I think there's one more. Oh, come on. There we go. Or he could capture ships coming up into the cities. That was an ideal base for Jose, right there at Boca Grande, catching ships all over the Gulf of Mexico. And he's got that one right down by Key West. Now, he was a very bloodthirsty pirate because of the whole vengeance thing. He killed everyone when he took their ship, unless you were an attractive woman. Children, unattractive women, they died. But attractive women, he kept, because he liked the ladies. So he would take them to Captiva Island. Captiva, get it? And he had a little stockade on Captiva Island where he would keep his personal harem. But he only had room for so many. So every time he added someone had to die. And then there's Yusepa Island, right back there. He captured a ship one time with a beautiful little teenage Spanish princess named Josefa. And he just thought she was terrific and fell in love with her. But of course, she wanted nothing to do with him. So in a fit of rage, he took out his sword and cut off her head. Then felt bad about it. So he buried her on that island with full honors and named the island after her. Now this was a time of lots of wars. People don't think about the European wars when they're talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, but they had a big impact. And who was responsible for all of these wars? There we go, Napoleon. Obviously, all the Napoleonics. So Britain was at war with Spain from 1793 to 1803. With France. Britain was at war with Spain from 1797 to 1802. Britain again was at war with France from 1803 to 1815. Britain was at war with Spain from 1804 to 1808. And then Spain switched sides and joined Britain and was at war with France from 1808 to 1814. So you can see this was a lot of confusing time for everybody in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, British privateers operated out of Nassau. Privateers are legal pirates. They have letters of marque, which gives them permission to attack ships of the enemy. So the British government would give their privateers letters of marque, allowing them to attack Spanish ships. The French would do the same thing, allowing them to attack British ships. The French privateers were primarily out of Guadeloupe and Martinique. Now, a little bit of background on Louisiana, because this plays a very important role in our story. Louisiana had been Spanish. It was sold to Spain in 1783. Then in October of 1800, Louisiana was sold back to France. And then just a few years later, in October of 1803, with the Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana was sold to the United States. And that's how we got it. And suddenly, New Orleans became a huge boom town. During this time, we had the Haitian slave revolt on the island of what is now Haiti, but back then it was a French colony of Saint-Domingue. The slaves rose up and eventually took over the government. So Saint-Domingue then became Haiti. And everyone that wasn't a slave, whether you were black or white, fled. And they went to New Orleans. There were a lot of black slave owners at that time, prior to the slave revolt. Because the early slaves had kind of like a system where if you worked really good, you got freed. And then you could buy property and start your own plantation. That's where Mardi Gras came to New Orleans. Because Mardi Gras was a Haitian tradition that goes back to Nigeria. And so when all of the Haitian, well, the people from Saint-Domingue came to New Orleans, they brought their Mardi Gras tradition along. Now, one of those people was a man named Black Caesar, who was a pirate captain that operated out of Elliot's Key. See it down there? Perfect spot to take ships coming through the Flora Straits. Now, there's a couple of different versions on who he was. One of the versions is that his name was really Henry Caesar, and that he had been part of the slave revolt in Haiti. And as part of the revolt in 1804, he managed to capture a Spanish ship and decided to go into the pirate business. Another version is that he was an African chief that had been captured and was being transported to the Caribbean on a slave ship, but managed to lead a revolt, capture the ship, throw his captives overboard, and then decided to become a pirate. But there's a third version. Oh yeah, there's the slave ship. There's a third version that he was a member of Blackbeard's crew. Now there was a man named Black Caesar who was arrested with Blackbeard at Ocracoke in 1718. This is 1804. How does 1718 fit into it? Well, one version says, oh, well, he was 126 years old. Yeah, I think this is a mistaken identity. So let's just kind of rule out that one and go with the Henry Caesar from the Haitian slave revolt. Now, he operated out of Biscayne Bay, Elliot's Key, capturing ships coming through the Florida Straits. Great location for it. This is really getting annoying.
I can go back and do it
No, that's okay. He was also a very bloodthirsty pirate that killed all of his captives, except for the attractive young ladies. It's interesting how that seems to be a common theme. Now, during the course of his career, wait a minute, he took about between $2 and $6 million in treasure that he buried. And we know exactly where that is. It's right there at Elliot's Key. Or maybe it's on Pine Island. Or maybe it's at Whitehorse Key. Or it could be on Marco Island, Sanibel, and the other Pine Island. All right, so far not a single dime of any of his money has ever been found. And he did become partners with José Gaspar. He located, let me back up a little bit. He located on Sanibel Island. And he named the island after the girlfriend of his quartermaster. Other pirate captains started joining Jose. A man named Brewster Baker and another one with a colorful name of Old King John. And they located their headquarters on Pine Island. So you had this whole pirate community growing here. Maybe 300-400 pirates. And then eventually, the famous Jean Lafitte from New Orleans became partners with José Gaspar. Now, Florida has a lot of pirate legends. Let me tell you a couple of them. Yeah. There. Amelia Island has the most. If if you go to Amelia Island, they will tell you that Jean Lafitte, Blackbeard, and Captain Kidd all operated out of Amelia Island as their own personal base. So let's take a look and see if that's true. Well, Captain Kidd has a reputation of being a really fierce pirate, but that's just a legend. He only committed one act of piracy in his entire life. He was sailing in the Indian Ocean with letters of marque to take French ships. He arrived in April 1697. And he captured a small French ship right off the bat. But by February, almost a year later, he hadn't captured a single ship. His crew was getting very angry. They were on the verge of mutiny. And suddenly he saw this gorgeous, big, huge merchant ship just waiting to be taken. It was the Quita merchant, the Mogul of India's treasure ship. So his men went out and easily captured it. But there was a problem with the ship. First of all, it belonged to the Mogul of India, who were allies of Great Britain, not on his letters of marque. Secondly, the captain of the ship worked for the British East India Company. So, yeah, but he really wanted the ship. So he was rummaging through the paperwork and he found this letter from the French officials allowing them to pass through French privateer area. That's it. That's my proof. They're in league with the French. So I'm going to take the ship and use that letter as my defense. When he was on his way back, when he arrived at Antigua to resupply, he learned that he was public enemy number one. He was wanted everywhere for piracy. It had created a major diplomatic incident. So he sailed to Mona Island, where he sank his ship, maybe buried some treasure there. They've never found any. But he got another ship from a friend and made his way back to New York, because he was originally from New York. What about Amelia Island? Well, he sailed right past it. I doubt if he stopped there. There just wasn't any time for him to stop there. And plus, would he bury treasure there? It was a Franciscan mission at the time. And it's a really bad idea to bury your treasure on a farmland where there's a lot of people around, because it probably won't be there when you go back to get it. So when he finally went to London to stand trial for piracy, he said, well, I had letters of marque. But they said, no, those letters of marque are no good because it wasn't a French ship that you attacked. And he was hanged on the 23rd of May, 1701. So, did Captain Kidd, was he operate out of Amelia Island? Nope. Sorry. But what about Blackbeard? We know more about Blackbeard than probably any other pirate. Most people don't realize that he was only a pirate captain for 9 months. You think of Blackbeard as being like for 20 years. Just 9 months. It was from September 1717 to June 1718. Now he started his career just before that as a member of Ben Hornigold's crew. And they did a loop through the Caribbean, going down to the Yucatan Peninsula, taking ships along the way. Then he partnered up with Stede Bonnet, another pirate, and together they set off from Nassau up the coast past Amelia Island. They took a ship off Capes of Virginia. Then, from the Cape Charles, they went to Cape May, the entrance to Philadelphia, where they took 20 prizes in 5 days. That's pretty busy. From there he sailed south, taking a few more prizes, and then continued on till he reached Martinique. Then he got lucky. He saw a slave ship, La Concordia, and captured it. And that became the Queen Anne's Revenge. From there, he sailed up inside the Antilles, looping around. There he goes up towards Nassau again, then around Cuba, taking more prizes, through the Gulf of Honduras, taking more prizes. about one prize ship every week. Then looped around, taking one more final ship. From Nassau, then he sailed north, taking a few more prizes, right past Amelia Island, and blockaded Charlestown, South Carolina. He was there for 5 days and took between 8 and 10 prizes. Then he sailed to Topsail Inlet, where he sinks the Queen Anne's Revenge. There we go. From there, he took one, well, let me back up. This is very finicky. From there, he takes a small sloop and he goes to Ocracoke, which was his last base. He was later killed in a battle at Ocracoke by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. So, do you think Blackbeard was on Amelia Island? No. So, where do these stories come from? This surprised me. Fishing guides. In the 1880s, Florida's tourist fishing industry took off. And the guides with the best pirate stories got the best clients. You can just see them out there fishing. See that cove over there? That's where Blackbeard the pirate had his base. And then some of the guys started selling fake treasure maps. So when the Florida automobile tourist industry took off in the 50s, the locals just kept telling the pirate stories. What about Jean Lafitte? He's the next person we're going to talk about, because we just mentioned that he was partners with José Gaspar. Now, there's an interesting book written by John Laughlin in 1948 that claims to be the actual handwritten journal of Jean Lafitte. There it is. He claims that he was the great-grandson of Jean Lafitte, and he found that journal in his attic. That Jean had written that before he died, put it in an old shoebox, left it up in the attic to be discovered later on. Now, in his journal, he says that he's a Sephardic Jew, that he was originally from Saint Domingue, which became Haiti. He had two brothers, Alexander and Pierre, and Alexander really became Dominic Hugh, who was a famous person that was with him. It wasn't just a friend, it was his older brother. And he also mentions his association with José Gaspar. When he died, he moved to the when he retired from piracy, he moved to the United States, where he wrote the journal and died in 1850 of natural causes. That journal today is in the Sam Houston Regional Library and Research Center. Okay, so is that real? Well, it's in Laughlin's handwriting, so that brings it to a great deal of question. Plus, he was also accused of forging documents from Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, and David Crockett. So, let's say that's a big no, and just run that book off. It seems to be working a little bit better now, being raised up. We know a lot about his brother Pierre, and he was born in Bordeaux, France. Jean Lafitte was actually a French privateer operating on Guadeloupe. His brother Pierre was in the import-export business and went to Saint Domingue, because that's a great place to be, because that's where the sugar cane is grown. And if you're an importer-exporter merchant, you make a fortune. During the Haitian slave rule, he was one of those that left Haiti and went to New Orleans. Now, Simon Bolivar appears in 1808. He was leading a revolution to try and take South America away from Spain. And the main cities are Cartagena and Caracas. And he was issuing letters of marque to just about anybody, because he wanted to reduce the Spanish authority. So suddenly, everybody was a privateer. Everybody had letters of marque from Simon Bolivar. In 1809, Jean Lafitte joins his brother in New Orleans with letters of marque from Simon Bolivar. He established his base at Barataria. His brother stayed in town and handled the business end of the operation, and Jean Lafitte stayed in Barataria and handled the pirates. Oh, excuse me, not pirates, they had letters of marque. Privateers. Now there's Grand Isle and Grand Terre. Those are the two islands at the entrance of Barataria Bay. He built a house on Grand Isle, and his little fort and his base of operations are on Grand Terre. This is a photograph I took from Grand Isle looking at Grand Terre. You can't get there by car, you could only get to Grand Terre by boat. And the fort would have looked something like that. Not too big, but sufficient. Now there's the customs inspection at the entrance to the Mississippi River. And you're supposed to stop at the customs office and pay tariffs on the merchandise you're bringing in. But Jean Lafitte's pirates went straight to Barataria, bypassing the customs, and smuggled their merchandise into New Orleans through the back waterways. So when you hear the U.S. government wanted him for being a pirate, that's not true. They wanted him for tax evasion. It was an IRS beef that they were wanted for Jean Lafitte. Well, in 1812, the relationship with Great Britain was just too strained. So the U.S. Congress declared war on Britain, and the War of 1812 was on. In the summer of 1814, the target for the British invasion was New Orleans. Andrew Jackson was transferred in from Mobile to New Orleans in order to defend it. He was up against 60 vessels and 14,516 British troops. He had about 3,000 troops. And he was really low on supplies, and time was running out. He desperately needed gunpowder, muskets, and flints. Now that's Maspero's. It's a great restaurant about 2 blocks off of Jackson Square. The best French onion soup I've ever had in my life. He met Jean Lafitte on the 2nd floor of Maspero's, and they made a special deal. If Lafitte brought him all of the gunpowder and weapons he needed, he would give a pardon to all of his men that had been arrested. And that's exactly what he had, 7,500 flints, 500 muskets, and a warehouse full of gunpowder. They moved all of those supplies to the Chalmette plantation, which is where the battle was going to take place. And in January 1815, the Battle of New Orleans, there's a pretty good diagram of it, took place at the Chalmette plantation. Jean Lafitte was a key part of the success that Jackson had in defeating the British. Now, after the Battle of New Orleans, Jean Lafitte eventually wound up in Galveston, Texas for a little while, where he operated for about 2 years in a pirate base. Then he left for the coast of Florida, where he met José Gaspar. Now, back to Gaspar. We've gone the background is done. Gaspar had a lot of government spies working for him that were in the government office. And he learned that $100,000 was going to be transported from Cuba to New Orleans aboard a steam vessel. Steam vessels were brand new. They were very rare, and they were fast. He came up with a brilliant plan. He took one ship and grounded it on a sandbar, and then had all of his pirates go out onto the beach as if they were stranded there. Then he hid his vessel, the Flora Blanca, out of sight. When the steam vessel came by, they would see the stranded pirates, feel the need to rescue them. Then they would send up a signal, and José Gaspar could sweep out in the Flora Blanca and capture it. It was a good plan. Didn't work. So here comes the steamboat. He chose the wrong pirates to go on that island, because the ones he chose didn't like Jose very much, and decided, maybe it's time we leave his company. So they all went aboard the steamship, told the captain exactly what was going to happen, and the steamship sailed off without Jose Gaspar getting a chance to take it. Now, 1821 was a very pivotal year for the Caribbean because of all of the revolutions. You had the revolution in South America that was finally successful, and that became the nation of Colombia. You had the revolution in Mexico that was finally successful, and that became the nation of Mexico. You even had a revolution on Hispaniola, the capital of the Spanish Caribbean, that was successful, and that became the Dominican Republic. And then finally, Spain decided, I've had enough of Florida, I'm going to sell it to the United States, let them deal with the problems and the mosquitoes. And Florida became a territory of the United States. In fact, the only two Spanish possessions left in the Caribbean was Cuba and Puerto Rico. And pirates were everywhere. Because Cuba and Puerto Rico didn't care about pirates, they had no interest in arresting them. So those two islands produced hundreds and hundreds of pirates. Unlike privateers, they had no letters of marque. And they were all pretty harsh to their crews. So the U.S. decided we're going to do something about this, and they put together an anti-piracy squadron. Basically, the bulk of the U.S. Navy was all sent to the Caribbean in order to stamp out piracy once and for all. One of their ships was the USS Enterprise. Name sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Not the same one.
Meanwhile, back on Gasparilla, they realized that time was running out. It wouldn't be long before the U.S. Navy would rout them out of there. So one by one, the pirate captains started leaving. Even Black Caesar left. And finally, it was just down to the two captains, José Gaspar and Jean Lafitte. In the spring of 1822, they were sitting on the beach having a party. They were going to split shares and go their separate ways the next day. This is the last night we're going to be together. And suddenly they saw a vessel very close, just like begging to be taken. Okay, let's have one more ship. So the order was, to the mast, men, and all of the sailors ran out to the two vessels, except 10. They left 10 guys behind to guard the treasure. And they sailed out after this mysterious merchant ship. The Flora Blanca caught up to it first and fired a warning shot across its bow. They didn't get the answer they wanted, because this was actually the USS Enterprise. And the stars and stripes went up, the gun ports opened, and the Enterprise let loose a tremendous broadside that shook the deck of the Flora Blanca. José Gaspar knew he had no chance, so he tied an anchor around his waist and shouts, "Gasparilla dies by his own hands, not the enemy's," and jumps overboard, sinking into oblivion. Now, Jean Lafitte, watching in horror of what was happening to his buddy, said, "I gotta get out of here," and circled around and went up way to the north, but didn't get very far. He got about as far as the Manatee River, when suddenly he met another U.S. warship that opened up a broadside and sank his schooner. There it goes. He and some of his pirates managed to make it ashore, and they disappeared into the jungles of Florida, never to be heard from again. Now, on Gasparilla Island, there's about $30 million buried somewhere. Nobody knows where it is. Now the truth. None of that was true. None of that about José Gaspar was true at all. The USS Enterprise was part of the anti-piracy squadron, but it was in Cuban waters. It was never in the Gulf of Mexico. And there is no logbook entry of any such battle with any type of pirate. In fact, there's no historical evidence that José Gaspar ever lived. There is no record of him taking any ships. There is no record of any ships being captured. So, let's go back. What about the Spanish thing, the court? There is no record of anybody named José Gaspar that went to the Spanish Naval Academy, was ever an officer in the Spanish Navy, or was ever assigned to court. So that was all made up. Now, what about Maria Luisa? Well, she was very real. She was the king's son's wife. Chances are she would not have gotten involved. But Manuel Godoy is the interesting one. Yes, he was the prime minister, but later on, in 1782, when he was supposedly the foe of José Gaspar, he was 15 years old. And if you look at a 1774 map, you can see Gasparilla clearly marked a long time before Jose was supposed to have gotten there. And what about Black Caesar? There is no evidence that Black Caesar has ever lived either. The earliest reference I can find is from a book called Black Caesar's Clan by Albert Payson Terhune, published in 1922. Weird guy. He writes books about collies, as you can kind of tell. And in this book, he's walking his collie on the beach, and he comes across a homeless person that tells him about the story of Black Caesar, and then he goes off looking for. It's a horrible book. I tried to read it. I can't get through it. So what about John Lafitte? Well, he definitely was very real. But he was operating out of Mujeres, Mexico, when he was supposed to be with Jose Gaspar. And he was actually in prison in Cuba when he was supposedly doing the battle with the USS Enterprise. So what's the truth behind Jose Gaspar? Where did all this come from? Well, there actually was a pirate, a small-time pirate named Jose Gaspar, that was operating off of St. Bartholomew in 1821. But he was caught by the U.S. Navy and stopped. Very small-time pirate, can't be our guy. Now, the Louisiana Purchase was 1804, and in 1904, actually in 1898, they were coming up on the 100th anniversary. And there was a lot of publicity about the Louisiana Purchase. Of course, Thomas Jefferson was behind the Louisiana Purchase. And a story was written in 1898 that he had to make a down payment of $3 million to the French or he'd lose the deal. Congress hadn't approved it yet. So he had to get that money to France. So he hired two people to secretly take the down payment and give it to the French government. And those two people were Jean Lafitte and Jose Gaspar. Now, the story is totally fiction, but it was popular because it has a lot of things that people like. It's got the president going against Congress and doing secret things that's illegal and using pirates to do it. Everybody likes stuff like that. Well, really what happened in Tampa in 1900, there was a man named Ricardo the Mystic. He was a vaudeville hypnotist. And he started running a seance scale. Find the gold of Gasparilla. And you would pay him money, and his medium would go into a trance and ask Jose Gaspar where his treasure was buried. The police finally broke up that. But that's what got the name Jose Gaspar into the minds of people in Tampa. Now, in 1904, some businessmen in Tampa said, what can we do to make a lot of money? We want something like Mardi Gras. We want to bring in lots and lots of people. So they decided to have a May Day parade with a pirate parade and a pirate ball. Everybody likes pirates. And they put together a group of merchant businessmen and politicians called Ye Mystic Crew of Gasparilla to put the whole thing together. Now there's the headlines talking all about what a great event it was. And at that time, the king, whoever was crowned king of the ball, was Gasparilla. And it was his first name, so it was Edward Gasparilla. And then, Frank Gasparilla, or whoever it was. It was a huge, successful event. But they needed a real story about Gasparilla. So Edwin D. Lambright kind of wrote a basic story about who this guy was. Now, who is Edwin D. Lambright? He was a member of the Mystic Crew of Gasparilla and the managing editor of the Morning Tribune. Now, in 1907, phosphate was found on the actual island of Boca Blanca. And the Charlotte Harbor and Northern Railroad built a railroad spar to take out the phosphate. The president, Robert Bradley, went down there and inspected and fell in love with the island and bought it. He decided to build an inn at the end of the railroad tracks, a luxury resort inn called the Gasparilla Inn. Figured to make a lot of money that way. And the inn was scheduled to open in 1913. The timing was perfect because, there's what the inn looks like today. It's still there. It's still a luxury inn, about $500 a night to stay there. Got a great golf course and a restaurant. I actually was forced to stay there doing research for my book. Timing was perfect because 1913 was the year that the Gasparilla Festival was moved to February and became its own standalone event. Not just a pirate parade and ball as part of another event, but the Gasparilla Festival. There's the newspapers all announcing it. So Robert Bradley really wanted to publicize his inn. People would buy railroad tickets to come to Tampa. People would buy railroad tickets to go to his inn. People would spend money at his inn. So he hired a guy to write a brochure about the Gasparilla Inn. And in that brochure, he tells the story of José Gaspar. This is where Manuel Godoy comes from, Captiva Island, The Little Princess, Black Caesar, and Jean Lafitte. They're all invented by Pat Lemoyne for the brochure advertising the Gasparilla Inn. And I'm sure that the Gasparilla Inn sold like buckets and shovels so they could go look for the treasure. And of course the battle with the Enterprise was all in that brochure. Now, he also mentions the $30 million that is buried somewhere on Boca Grande. Now, as I mentioned, Robert Bradley bought the island. So what was he doing with the rest of the land? He was selling it. Can you think of a better real estate gimmick? There's $30 million buried somewhere here. We don't know where. Maybe the plot that you buy will have it. All right, so he attributes the story to Panther John Gomez, because you have to have some kind of source. This is Pat Lemoyne. Said he got his story from Panther John Gomez. So who is he? He was supposedly one of the 10 men that was left behind. That's why he knows all the details. And what was he doing for a living? He was a fishing guide. 10,000 islands. Now, he might have been, the real Panther John, might have been the first fishing guide to start making up pirate stories. Because he died in 1900. In his early census, he was listed as being born in 1828, which would have meant he was 72 when he died. Very reasonable. But as soon as he started telling pirate stories, he started listing his birth date in the census as 1774, which would have made him 126 when he died. That way he could say, I was back there with all those pirates. I was part of it. Now you see a couple of other things. Once this starts going, they've got Boca Grande to send a big band to the festival, and there's the little article, and José Gaspar himself is going to lead the band. Now, the treasure hunter, Sewell Ford, human nature author, has the clue to Gasparilla gold. There's a whole article that appeared in 1916. Apparently, Sewell Ford, who is a snowbird, had a house in St. Petersburg, was walking along the beach and came across a homeless guy that told him all about this treasure from José Gaspar and Jean Lafitte, and he knew where it was. And if Sewell Ford would just fund the operation, he could show it to him. The island he chose was Cayo Palau, the island right behind Boca Grande where the pirate base was. He claims that he found jewelry there and showed this guy. I found a couple of rings, some jewelry, some coins, and a lot of bones. Well, it was a Calusa burial mound. So one would expect you would find bones at a Calusa burial mound if you're digging. But Sewell Ford fell for it, and they started a company called the Gasparilla Treasure Company. They put in millions of dollars to go buy this island so they could hunt for the treasure. And they were looking for the Lafitte Gaspar treasure, the $3 million that José Gaspar was given to the French purchase of the Louisiana Purchase. they brought that story up and tied that into this too. Then the Tampa Daily Times ran a story, and who was Jose Gaspar? They reprinted that brochure word for word, which is how I know exactly what it says, and they even attributed the Charlotte Harbor Northern Railroad in the byline. Later, Pat Lemoyne said the whole thing was a cockeyed lie. He made up stories that tourists wanted to hear. That's where all the blood curdling, like that kind of thing. The most horrible stories you could think of, he put it in the brochure. Now, there's a man named Francis Bradley who was writing a serious work. He was a historian from Boston, called Piracy in the West Indies and Its Suppression. And his golfing buddy was Robert Bradley of the Charlotte Harbor Northern Railroad, who gave him a copy of that brochure. And without checking the source, he put it in his book, word for word. And then the Gaspar legend got the kind of status of being legitimate. So we've got to say that Jose Gaspar has done a lot of great things for Tampa. The $30 million that's buried somewhere is actually $40 million of income that comes into Tampa every year with the Gaspar investment. That's the real treasure of Jose Gaspar. And certainly, he does a lot of good things for other organizations. The crews do a lot of great charity work. So it is a very worthwhile thing. But now you know the truth about Jose Gaspar. Long live Gasparilla, long may he reign. Okay, do I have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I was reading the Tampa Bay Times on October 15th and the treasure quest for Jose Gaspar's coins. Whose coins are they then?
Who knows? Yeah, I was in Carabel, Florida several months ago for a festival. And everybody was talking about this pirate treasure ship they found. I don't know anything about it. So I kind of looked up online, and what did they find here? It was an 1898 Norwegian logging ship that sank in a hurricane. It was there to pick up a shipment of pine logs and take it back to Norway. But if it's a shipwreck, it's got to be a pirate treasure ship. You know, I've seen people, look at this, look, I found some pirate coins. That's a 1972 quarter. I know, but it's a pirate coin. So, yeah, I'll give you a second. People drop money all the time, coins everywhere, and it might even be some older stuff, because there were some Franciscan missions around here, and they brought in a lot of Spanish money to fund the missions, and the missions would use that money to purchase things. And stuff gets dropped. Question over here. Yes, sir.
How does anybody know where anybody was during all of this? Is there a log library, or how do we know where anybody went?
Like Jean Lafitte?
Okay,
Lots of records about Jean Lafitte.
from where? From who?
Well, for one thing, in New Orleans, every time Jean Lafitte came into town, any one of his privateers, they sold merchandise, there's a sales receipt, a sales record. And they actually, you know, to Captain so-and-so, this much money. Andrew Jackson wrote a lot about Jean Lafitte and his help and participation in the Battle of New Orleans. And there's a lot more stuff that where Jean Lafitte is in Galveston. He kind of got into some trouble with the U.S. And asked permission to stay there an extra 6 months, and wrote a detailed letter to Commodore Patterson. And the copy of that letter is in a museum on Galveston Island, and I've seen a copy of that letter. So there's lots of documentation about this. And Jean Lafitte actually became an admiral in the Colombian Navy before he died. Yes, ma'am.
I just was gonna say, did they keep like logs of like shipping logs when they went to different ports and such like that? That would, I mean, that seemed, was that kind of like a process back then, and that would be a way to trace things?
Possibly. Privateers weren't known to be good
Yeah,
admin
good with that, of
people.
course.
So their logs might not have been
Right.
really good. Of course, we know we have all the logbooks from the U.S. Navy vessels that were in the area, like the logbook from the Enterprise, and the logbooks from other pirates that had been captured at that time period. And then there's newspaper stories, like that one on the José Gaspar and St. Bartholomew. That was in a newspaper article in a Pensacola newspaper in 1821. So what else? Yes, ma'am?
There's Gaspar, then there's Gasparilla.
Yes.
And they're interchangeable?
Yes. So the original was Gasparilla, which Edwin D. Lambright says means Gaspar the pirate. No, it means little Gaspar. Gasparilla is, Spanish. And so if you're a macho pirate, are you gonna name your island Little Gaspar? No, probably not. Gasparilla Island was named a long time before him, and it was named after a Franciscan priest. So the Gasparilla was already there. When they started this whole legend, I thought, they just kind of looked at a map, Gasparilla, ooh, that sounds pretty neat, that's mysterious, let's make that the name of the pirate. And then when Edwin D. Lambright added his stuff, it got changed to Gaspar, José Gaspar.
Same person.
Same person.
Thank you.
Yes, sir?
Allegedly, over the old Spanish well in the Ampo River,
Mm-hmm.
supposedly the pirates used that to replenish the water supplies,
They definitely did.
and the Spanish shipping as well.
Right.
And there's supposed to be some treasure over in that area.
Yeah, I didn't have time to put everything in this presentation. I do have that in some of my others. Louis Michael Ory was one of Jean Lafitte's privateers. And there's rumor that he used the Anclote River well to bury some treasure. Now, it is true, that was a freshwater well. It's documented back hundreds of years. Ships stopped there to take fresh water on all the time. When a ship is coming into the Anclote River, it's going slow, isn't it? Great time to ambush the ship. So it's very likely that Jean Lafitte's privateers would have ambushed ships coming into the Anclote River or coming out of the Anclote River. I saw a TV show about Louis Michael Ory that said that he buried some treasure there. Don't believe it. Because if you're going to bury treasure, would you bury it in one of the busiest places on the coast of Africa where ships are constantly coming in? No, I'd go somewhere else if I'm going to bury it, and I'd be secretive about it. I have not seen any documentation about the buried treasure except that TV show. But yeah, Anclote River, that's true. Yes, sir?
Who used Safety Harbor?
Safety Harbor. I've heard a lot of activity at Safety Harbor, and the same thing. It makes a great ambush spot. Those ships were coming up the coast, the west coast of Florida, lots of ships because of Pensacola, New Orleans. And because of the winds, if you've got a powerboat, when you come around Key West, you can just go straight for New Orleans and you're good. But the winds were primarily blowing from east to west. So sailboats would kind of hug the coast of Florida so the wind would keep them on target. Does that make sense? So consequently, the main shipping lanes in the Gulf of Mexico was just a few miles offshore, which would make Tampa Bay, Safety Harbor, ideal ambush spots to sit and wait. Oh, here's a ship, let's go down.
What was the name of the famous guy in Safety Harbor that was a doctor and this and that, and he was none of those, he was a con man?
I don't know. I haven't heard that.
There's a big memorial to him in Safety
Philippe.
Harbor.
It's not Felipe.
Philippi?
Philippi
Philippi Park.
Philippi, Philippi Park.
Philippi.
Doctor something Philippi.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that. Look that up.
He was none of the above.
He was a pirate.
Well,
Privateer.
Yes.
That started his story.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think there's a marker there in Safety Harbor that says something to the effect that Philippi was a surgeon for Napoleon.
right,
Yeah.
that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And he wasn't.
He wasn't, yeah.
More folklore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you constantly hear about treasure being, dug up. I've got some friends that are treasure hunters professionally, and they uncover, most of the stuff they uncover is early 20th century. Every once in a while they'll find an old coin. Now, on the East Coast, it's completely different because you had the 1715 treasure fleet that went down on the east coast of Florida. And every time there's a storm, gold coins, silver coins wash up all the time.
What did you, when you were on that TV program, Oak,
Beyond Oak Island,
yes, what were they talking to you?
they wanted me to talk about Olivier Levasseur and his lost treasure, and also Blackbeard and his lost treasure.
Did they ever find anything on
Uh,
this island?
They're still digging. I
Yeah,
guess.
they're always still digging.
That's the most story.
Season 11.
Yeah, the real gold from Oak Island is in the ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.